always the worst when you're waiting for 1 minute to pass. Perfect. This January 26, 2021 special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Number 48 Governing Board will come to order. Board Member Sanowski, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will have a roll call of present governing board members, starting from the chair's left.
Zach Lindsay.
Libby Hartwell.
Patty Beckman.
Julie Sanowski.
Jan Michael Greenberg. All board members are present and there is a quorum. The board will now move to agenda item 4, approval of agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda as presented? The chair moves to approve the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Board member Libby Hartwell's seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 5A, approval of building level COVID metrics to establish parameters regarding a return to distance learning for specific campuses, classrooms, and/or programs. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and members of the governing board. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that today is the 1-year anniversary of the first confirmed case of COVID in the state of Arizona. So 1 year later, we are dealing with a significant pandemic issue that has disrupted the educational process, not only for Scottsdale Unified, but for students across the state and nation. This past weekend, nearly 2,000 Scottsdale Unified School District employees were able to be vaccinated as a result of our partnership with Honor Health. And so I just want to take a moment to express my appreciation for Honor Health, Michelle Pabas at Honor Health, and the work that they did to make that vaccination possible for our staff, and pretty simple and seamless process in terms of the drive-through. What you have in front of you in terms of proposed COVID, building-specific COVID metric is the result of a significant number of meetings with the committee that we pulled together at the request of the governing board to look at under what conditions would a building return to virtual learning. As you know, we've been since the fall, as the guidance from the Maricopa County Department of Public Health has kind of shifted, we've been looking at keeping our schools open on a school-by-school basis, really looking at what's happening in the school rather than an all-or-nothing approach. It's been very surgical in nature. However, many people ask the question, okay, what would be the tipping point for a school to return to virtual, particularly when we're at a point in time when all of the benchmark metrics, the ADHS benchmark metrics are read and have been read for some time. So we've got substantial community spread. And to answer that question, we convened a committee comprised of teachers, support staff, building level administrators, central office administrators, our 2 school lead nurses, and our COVID specialist. That internal committee met several times to have the conversation, and as you recall, the meeting where it was first discussed, we brought up that Gilbert and Chandler had identified threshold indicators that they were using to determine when a building would return to virtual as guidance for their districts. So we started that process, had the conversation, and tonight we have with us Rebecca Kate, who is an assistant principal at Desert Mountain High School, Steve Geislinger, a teacher at Chaparral, and Whitney Jennings, who is our COVID specialist, who are going to talk about the specifics of the recommendation in terms of the data that was used to formulate the recommendation. As they're coming up to the podium, I want to talk to you just briefly about a conversation I had with Dr. Sonnenschein today. I had sent her this draft. She responded last night giving a favorable review, and then we talked more specifically because I had follow-up questions. And she actually believes that the recommendations of the committee are good recommendations. She supports the plan as proposed. She did not suggest any revisions. I pushed her on a few of the items, and so as we get to our Q&A portion, if there are other specific aspects that are relevant from my conversation with her, I'll share that. But I just wanted to let you know that this plan was reviewed by Dr. Sonnenschein, so MCDPH did have an opportunity to provide input and to express an opinion about what we're bringing forward this evening, and we have their full support. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca Kate.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Menzel, and thank you, Board. So I'm just going to briefly run through for you the tables that's been presented to you guys and already shared. Just kind of making sure everything is clarified and that it's hopefully effectively communicated. The first table that we have, there's a total of 4 tables. The first table is for the elementary schools, and you'll notice there's 2 yellow categories, and up at the top, there's this activate a virtual evaluation team. So we've coined that the VET. So it's either the VET or the VET process, in which is something that our district goes through. We like acronyms here, I've discovered. So if there's a confirmed outbreak at any point in time, it will activate the VET evaluation team. And remember, the definition of a confirmed outbreak is more than 2. And the COVID specialist will speak more to that, Whitney, when it's her turn, if you have any questions regarding that. Active cases, I went ahead and added into the table that this is the definition that's straight off of our website that says it's the total confirmed in-person active cases for our students and staff that are on site. And then there's a link there specifically to our dashboard, so you can always flip back over to see where we're at with our numbers. And remembering the definition of an active case goes from Friday morning to the following Thursday. So every close of school Thursday is when the active case week is closed. So we're really looking at 1 week at a time. It goes from Friday morning to Thursday afternoon. And there'll be more conversations about the process of all of this. Again, Whitney will be sharing some of that, so I don't want to get ahead of us. Same is true for the K-8 schools, 1 confirmed outbreak, or if we have active cases, we split up the pre-K-5s and the K-8s. Things are different, but for this K-8, our committee agreed to just leave everything in the orange. If these numbers are hit, the VET process is activated, and we will take a look at what's going on in that school. If it's just K-8, if it's pre-K-5, and again, that process and the details of that process are things that the COVID specialist, Whitney, will be sharing with us, but this activates that if it happens. Middle schools and high schools, they look essentially the same, except for there's this salmon color over on the end. The difference with that is that if we hit any of those numbers in the salmon, it is an automatic, instantaneous switch to virtual. And the reason for that is something I'm going to go ahead and kind of pass over to Mr. Geislinger. He's going to talk a little bit about where these numbers came from, how they were created a little bit, and talk more specifics about some of the metrics and things that we use to create this. But that's the significant difference. Bearing in mind, as those numbers are growing at any point in time, if there's something going on in any school, you should know at any point in time the VET process can be activated. Okay, so these are a guideline for principals, nurses. It's like, oh, Arcadia, we're at 9, it's not a big deal. Okay, 10's the threshold, this is where we're at. Maybe we should be talking. It's always on the table. It's never, if you hit these numbers, there's no conversation. It's been a wide open door with the VET team, for the VET process. It's already kind of been pretty much going on. This is the virtual evaluation team, the list of people. It would be the COVID specialist, the principal, the assistant superintendent, the school nurse, and any additional team members that are warranted. That is who consists and makes up the VET team, the VET, I keep saying team, for the VET process. Before we go any further into a little bit more of how that VET process works, though, I did want to turn it over to Mr. Geislinger in order for him to be able to share a little bit more about how these numbers were created and where they came from. I'll leave it on elementary.
Thank you. Thank you all. So the process here was to make a determination as to a threshold that would be problematic at a given level. Because of the different composition of the elementary compared to the secondary, based upon the size of the cohorts that the students interact with and are active with in a given day, based upon higher levels of transmissivity and interesting behaviors of adolescents and young adults based upon the ability to effectively address problematic situations. The threshold percentage squeezes as you get towards the secondary levels. The baselines that we're using here are if there are 2% of elementary students and staff that are based on a chosen snapshot date. If 2% of the people in the school are active in a given week, that would cause a situation that would warrant going to the vet process. That percentage is narrowed down to 1.5% at the middle school level and 1% at the high school level. The basic reason for that is to avoid multiplicity of cases in a given cohort, so that you don't have additional cases that are unknown that might be reinforcing each other. That's essentially where we ended up with those numbers. There were a couple of small things that I wanted to address here. In addition to the other changes that Rebecca noted, we do also have an athletic threshold noted for the secondary schools, as well as the proposed hard cutoff that we have strong reasons for if you want to bring up those in discussion. But that's the framework. Whitney.
Thank you, Board. So I'm going to just touch on, again, this is the vet team, and kind of give you an example of how this has actually been working. We've been running through this particular situation with one of our schools right now, and I touch base with the principal. We actually have a chart that we've laid out to go in detail per grade level about where the cases are, number of students quarantined, do we have household close contacts that are quarantined in addition to that, and then what percentages we're running through each grade level. And then once I've done that, we touch base with our assistant superintendent, whether that be Dr. Sakos or Dr. Hagigat. And we're also including the nurse in that because they keep a lot of the real details about the students. They can tell us maybe if they're athletics or after school, are they doing kids club, things like that. And then, of course, we can add additional team members as warranted. It just kind of depends on the situation at the school. So the vet process in and of itself with this will consist of every Thursday, I call it the dashboard team, gets together and we get the numbers that are going to go up the following Friday morning that are available to the public. That Thursday, though, once we get those numbers together, we're going to have a conversation with our lead nurses. And if we haven't already seen a spread or worsened spread, in the days prior, they're going to let myself, Dr. Sakos or Dr. Hagigat know we need to get this process moving. We've got some schools that are in some worrisome spread situations. Once that decision is made, we'll review it. We'll make a decision by midday Friday at the latest, because we want to be sure that if a virtual communication is going out, that parents are notified Friday so that Monday they know they're at home doing a virtual learning. The schools, our proposal would be for them to be out for 10 school days. We feel that is an ample amount of time, not only to send the kids home virtually, but not a back and forth switch for, that maybe at a 5-day, time frame would last. And then if for any reason we do need to extend that, we would give you a 48 hours notice prior to the coming back or staying virtual. So that's all. And then, of course, the superintendent or assistant superintendent would convene the vet team for any buildings within 12 hours. They'll have to we would take that process to cabinet. They would review that again, and then they would communicate that with the parents of the school moving forward. Somebody have anything else? All right, I think that's
Thank you for that. I just want to express my appreciation, not only for Rebecca, Steve, and Whitney. Christine Bono is here. We've got I want to thank all the members of the committee that spent time working on this, really asking difficult questions in order to bring forward a recommendation that I think is very thoughtful. Part of why this is important is because people don't know exactly what process we go through when we're looking at the cases anyway. And so this really helps articulate much of what we've been doing. And since we hired Whitney, she's been taking the lead in kind of bringing people together, asking the difficult questions, the templates that have been created to look at not only the school level data, but then breaking down by classroom and grade level to really identify what's happening, what can we see here, and what is an appropriate response. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to add to the presentation, and that is, Rebecca mentioned we don't have to wait for that Thursday review to convene a vet process. And in fact, Dr. Sonnenschein indicated two things. One, she said, if you have any concerns, flag it for us and we'll have the conversation. And conversely, if they see anything and we haven't contacted them, they would reach out to us. The two-way communication between Scottsdale Unified and Maricopa County Department of Public Health is critical. And I know that Whitney has her contact and they're regularly in communication. So that is an ongoing part of our dialogue with respect to what's an appropriate next step given what we're seeing in the data. I just wanted to reinforce that. And then I know that they're here ready to answer questions based on the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Are there any board member questions? Board Member Lindsay?
Well, first, thanks to the committee for all the work that you guys have done. Really appreciate it. First question is with the red category, why not apply that to the 6-8 level at the K-8s?
That's a question that we addressed very specifically. Short answer is because it's a very small population in those schools. So the statistical variation that you have with a small population would make it problematic to be able to do that. If there is a vet at those schools, I would assume that a reasonable decision would be to have the middle school go virtual at the very least. But because it's such a small number, 2 students in 2 of the cases and 4 in the other case, having that the decision would be more likely to happen because of statistical variation, and we wouldn't want to do that if it wasn't necessary.
And then the other question I had is how did you come to 10 school days as opposed to like normal quarantining right now is 10 days? So, because the kids, it could be 16 calendar days, or if there's a break in there somehow,
Right.
it could go longer.
Okay.
We did talk about the difference between the 10 school days versus the 10 calendar days. And if in our proposed idea for this, if we're going virtual, announcing on Friday that it's happening on Monday, then you've got essentially 2 full weeks. I do understand what you're saying, that there might be holidays or things like that in there. The CDC suggests 10 days, but they're still saying 14 is better. Let's be honest. I think Dr. Sonnenschein, this is something that Dr. Menzel said he did talk with her about as well. So it just kind of covers everything. If the whole point of making them go virtual is in order for us to assist in getting the numbers back down, then erring on the side of a few extra days for consistency in the education system, as well as aligning with some of the medical suggestions that have been presented, seem like the right decision.
Okay, and then the last question I have is, can you explain the athletic threshold?
No. It's a subjective thing. It's really individualized. There's so many things going on. Athletics is extreme moving parts is really what it is. And so our athletic trainers are in tune with what's going on with every athlete. They find out if there is something going on. They see, is the team all EDL, not EDL, who's on campus, who's not, do we need to involve the nurse? It's very, very involved, and they have been doing a fantastic job. I mean, I think you guys have heard of this football team was quarantined, this happened. It was all done because of the work that they do. They're an amazing, well-oiled machine within that athletics department to be able to analyze, did this spread to the general public? How is this affecting? Those types of things.
Let me just piggyback on that a little bit, if I may. The reason to have a separate athletics threshold is because some of the athletic teams have a large portion of the students who are not on campus except for the athletics. So they will not be engaging in transmissivity with the population as a whole. So even if you have a significant spread within a team, it may not extend to the school as a whole. So that's why it's a separate thing.
Okay, thanks, I appreciate it.
And if I can just add, I did talk with Dr. Sonnenschein about the 10 days and how we landed on that. She was really concerned. She said it has to be at least 10 calendar days. The 14 is better. And that if you're in this environment and your goal is to, and as we've said, we're working to maximize mitigation while minimizing disruption. If you did the 5 days and then you had the bookend weekends, you're really only at 9 from that Friday. So you're under what the minimum amount of days is. And you might find yourself in this cycle where after 5 days, because you really haven't allowed it the full 14-day potential course of transmission, that you might end up a week from that period of time having to go back to virtual again. And we also want to avoid that disruption of in and out. So the goal would be if we have to go virtual. And again, we want to maintain in-person learning as long as we can do so safely. That's why we're looking at this enhanced mitigation strategy. Because once you cross that tipping point where you have uncontrolled spread in a school, you're gonna not only have to go virtual, but you've created some other negative consequences. So we're trying to get ahead of that curve by putting this process in place. And I think that the 2 weeks is actually a very defensible recommendation, given what we heard from Dr. Sonnenschein.
Board Member Beckman?
I have a couple, so I'll try and be brief. But it actually could be a lot longer for some of those kids, because if, for instance, if you, that's at the last end, that final student that triggers this number, the ones that came in before that were positive, that added into the number, may have been days before. So they may have been quarantining for 5, 6, 7 days prior to that. And then the school goes virtual with that last number, so they could be out significantly longer, right? My other question I have is the 1% at the high school level, is it at the VET level or is it at the automatic virtual level?
It's at the VET level, the automatic virtual,
Okay.
excuse me, let me re-say that. The yellow is 0.075, the red is, or the salmon red is 1%.
Okay.
And just to
then-
clarify, if a student gets sent home on a Monday, then the whole school is determined on Friday, they're going to be going virtual. It would really only have been those 4 days, 4 or 5 days that they would be in addition. I think you were saying 6 or 7 days. In your scenario of a student that got quarantined in the week, during that week.
Right, but if they had gotten quarantined the week before and they
Nope.
were in between, if they personally, and the school hadn't had anything yet, say my child was out on a Wednesday, had COVID, tested, was supposed to stay
Okay.
home because they were positive for 10
could.
days. The numbers weren't up yet at that school, and then all of a sudden,
The
they were
following week.
part of that number, and the next week, and they added in, technically, the school could go virtual that next week and then add 10 more. I mean, it's not a perfect science, but
Yes.
it could be significantly longer for some of these kids. Can you go over that athletic threshold again? Because I think our community needs to hear it, and I'm a little bit confused. So if it's 0.75 in the yellow and the red automatic return to virtual, explain to me again, if at the 0.75 level, you all determine, like we have had, that they say there was some positive cases in one of our athletic programs, and while you are determining this, then we get some more in that athletic program. How does that work? So explain it again so our community understands it, please, because I don't really.
The active cases that we're looking at are going to be for students that are in person.
Students
Okay.
and staff.
Students and staff that are in person.
Right.
If there's a high percentage of our athletes that are not in person because they are choosing to use the EDL option, they would not be considered in those numbers of active cases.
Okay.
But it still warrants having a
Conversation.
vet process, because we need to understand what's going on. We need to confirm whether or not they've been in school or not. And because what we saw in the fall was that a significant percentage of our cases were connected with athletics, it warrants additional review on the front end to make sure that there's not something else going on that would require us to take some different kind of action. May not lead to the automatic return of the whole school to virtual, because that might not be what the data shows, but it will, just like at the elementary, allow us to be able to ask what's going on and is there anything else we can or should be doing.
But my question with that is, and maybe you all understand it, I don't. If you have an athletic team and those students are coming to school, but you discover in this yellow area that the spread really occurred in the athletic practice, it really wasn't happening at school, and then the numbers went up, what then?
If they're coming to school, we can, again, it's correlational data in terms of where it's spread. The issue is if you have so many active cases in a school in a particular week, it's going to be very difficult to say that there wasn't some school-related aspect. We can't guarantee it 100%, but we're trying to avoid the tipping point where 13 becomes 39 becomes, a whole lot more. And that's where we're having intentional conversations to make sure that we're taking appropriate action.
I'm just trying to distinguish the difference between what we're doing right now when we analyze this data on a school-by-school basis and how it would be different than what we're proposing to do when we're hitting the yellow.
It won't be any different.
Okay.
It won't be any different. If the athletes are on campus, then they're going to be a part of the active cases threshold, and the numbers are going to be elevated, and that's something as a school we have to look at because there's a much higher probability of exponential growth within our school. So we're not changing the process at all.
Right.
And in fact, I think we've talked about this quite a bit as a committee. This document that we created is really here for us to just be able to effectively communicate what's already going on with just clear transparency to you and the entire community of what we're already doing. These things are already going on.
I understand that, and I appreciate that, but it was
Yeah.
just my understanding right now that when we looked at that and we discovered that the spread wasn't really happening in the school, that it was in the program.
Yep.
Even though those numbers were reported, it wasn't an automatic go to virtual. And so that's the differential I'm kind of seeing here, is that the numbers will become the numbers, even if we don't necessarily show that it was happening in the school.
So if our athletes are on campus and there's a spread within a team, then these numbers, the whole school is going to be directly affected. That's just statistics. That's just spread. That's.
When you look at our,
I'm just trying to understand it.
when you look at our data and what we've seen in the past, given the threshold indicators that are in place here for an automatic return to virtual, only one school would have been required to return to virtual in the fall, and that would have been Chaparral early in October.
That was my next question. So I appreciate that you said this, Dr. Menzel, because I was going to ask this next before I let other board members ask theirs. I had a few more. Was if we had this in place this whole time, and I asked you this because I wanted the community to hear this, would we have gone to virtual? If so, which schools, just to get an indication of where we have been?
And Chaparral would have been the only one that would have hit the mandatory return to virtual for 2 weeks. We have a number of schools, most of our high schools and a number of others that would have had vet process initiated either as a result of active cases or the outbreak status. So in our high schools, we've had a couple with athletics, still only 2 cases, but they were athletic related. And then we've got some of the other athletics that didn't reach outbreak status, but were athletic related. When I talked to Dr. Sonnenschein, the other thing she wanted me to point out to all of you, if you haven't looked on the county's website, the EpiCurve has made a shift downward, where she has argued that we have seen, we're 2 weeks beyond, maybe almost 3, the peak of the holiday spike in COVID cases. And so the case rates are coming down. They've been coming down. Hospitalizations are coming down. The death rate follows that. Now, none of it's a guarantee, right? All of the things that we continue to do, mask wearing, physical distancing, hand washing, avoiding large gatherings, avoiding parties, in small groups, all of these things contribute to whether or not we see additional spread in our community, but the data is moving in the right direction. So we have thresholds that are not unrealistically low. They're actually set at a rate that Dr. Sonnenschein thinks is defensible. She has no concerns. If your high school hit that level, she believes that going virtual for a couple of weeks actually makes sense, with the caveat that we need to encourage students not to socialize during that period of time. I mean, part of going virtual means staying separate so that we can allow the disease to kind of die off before, or the virus, so that you can bring kids back to school.
Board Member Sinowski, and then Board Member Hartwells.
I have a couple more questions for you. How do these recommendations impact our special needs programs, specifically our self-contained special ed programs, as far as the result of the vet action?
Regardless of whether it would be one of the yellow responses or one in salmon, where the school is asked to go to virtual for 10 days, unless the outbreak or situation specifically affects the self-contained special education, our recommendation would be to have those programs continue.
Okay. And then in regards to extracurricular, so we have some defining differences, and we've talked about the similarities with athletes being on campus. So what would happen to the extracurricular, let's say, team sports, if a school goes into a virtual learning scenario? Will those sports, even if they're EDL students, will our district still continue to allow practices and competitions to continue?
I know what I would suggest, but we did not specifically address that.
I think AIA has some guidelines for that.
AIA does have guidelines, and so we've differentiated between the things that are AIA qualified sports and something that might be an extracurricular, a club sport, even like we've done in middle school, where we've said at this juncture with community spread, we can't support continuing that. As much as we would like to be able to do it, we made that determination. So for the sports that are are under the AIA umbrella, we're following their guidelines. So for example, in one of our high schools, we've had an outbreak with wrestling team because they're less than 25. That team is on an 8-day pause. They can't have any practice, can't do anything else. So we would be implementing those recommendations. It's always possible that if we saw something that was so worrisome that we didn't think even the AIA guidelines went far enough, we could take different action. We would do that in consultation with the health department at that juncture.
Thank you.
Board Member Hartwells.
Okay, just as an opening confirmation, because I think that this is very important to underscore for the community, is currently the SUSD website has the Maricopa County Public Health Metric Dashboard up, and it's all red, and it's been all red for a while. However, the SUSD webpage reopening status reads yellow as hybrid. And that's just current, that's just fact. So the rationale, and that gap has been addressed, at least in part, by the Maricopa County Department of Public Health's letter in October of 2020, which is simply equates a standard as controlling spread with one's own school's efforts in using public health mitigation measures. It just generally states that. So currently, that analysis to go from the dashboard red to the reopening status yellow is just currently taking place, but out of view of the public eye. Mm-hmm. And is it not true that this proposal is simply an effort to make transparent the building by building process that is already underway?
Correct.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you. I have some specific questions, don't mind. The the staff numbers that are being used, the student staff number that's being used for the relative percents, are those only student staff that are in person on campus? Because there was some concern cited, a few of these numbers may or may not be accurate. So I'll ask that question of you.
So currently, the numbers on the dashboard that show the percentage per week are all enrolled students on that campus. We are actually looking at that, and this coming week, you will see students on campus versus students enrolled in that actual school. So those percentages are going to change. I'm hoping to put like a asterisk at the bottom so that when the percentages go up, the public doesn't
You know why?
overreact to seeing that, and explain that those are now on-campus students versus enrolled students on those campuses.
Excellent. Would it be possible to have two columns that then the summation of which would still be the existing number, so people could just see a little bit of granularity and then know where that relative percent is coming from next week compared to this week?
Yes, but also know that these numbers that we're presenting to you were provided to the principals and nurses on each campus. They're aware of their on-campus, numbers. So
Oh, sure.
they, you know what I mean? They went through the numbers and made adjustments and requests on what they thought the number should be. So they did at least look at them, knowing that the percentages they were provided were based off of an enrolled number versus an on-campus number.
Fair enough, and I appreciate you giving us that information, that our healthcare professionals have weighed in on the standard setting. I was just referring to relative to the dashboard that's on yet a different page of our COVID response. That would be very helpful. With respect to self-reported case positivity data, there has been some concern, not just in our community, but across the country, that relying on self-reported data has its warts, and the Maricopa County Department of Public Health and the State Department of Public Health all admit that there are data omissions. As a result, in the event of an outbreak, let's say that first mustard yellow column, at least mustard yellow, it looks like that to me, triggers the process, the vet process. Has there been some discussion? I think the answer is yes, based on what I'd asked this before. And where are we in that analysis and that discussion as to some kind of effort to perhaps improve the integrity of our case positivity data? And I say a classroom has two persons, two students, or a staff member and a student, and that classroom now has a qualified outbreak. We talked about pooled testing, as opposed, we're not going to require everyone to go get tested. But is there any, and is that too far out there?
It wasn't a part of the conversation with the committee. It is a part of the conversation that we've been having in terms of what other things can we be putting in place to help mitigate potential spread. One of our concerns is asymptomatic carriers, and how would we know? And we got an inquiry recently from a company that's doing pooled testing at the classroom level. So original pooled testing suggestions or proposals that I had were take 5 people at a time, which then gets to be, pretty challenging in terms of how you manage that and how costly it is. If you could do a classroom at a time, it creates a different level of conversation. Companies out of Boston, but they're doing pilot projects across the country, and so we're working on scheduling a meeting with Whitney and our 2 lead nurses to be able to have a conversation about what that might look like. If we do that, it would give us, again, a unit of analysis that's small enough that you can address it at that level. We've been trying to be minimally disruptive, so that's why our elementary schools, it's not the whole school, because if you can do a classroom, you're not having all of those children go back virtual for a period of time when we know that that's not best for their learning needs. So we're looking at what that will cost and the reliability of the company, the turnaround. They said they can do it in 24 hours. So it's some of those things we're working on getting the details. We suspect that some of the funding, CARES 2 or whatever they're calling, that might be able to help offset some of that cost, but we have to explore that as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
I did want to add, though, the committee did talk about what happens with the unreported cases. And when that was part of our conversation, which is why we wanted the thresholds at the level that we wanted them at, because we understand that the lower level, there might be more that we don't know about. And, there's your gut, there's your intuition, there's the nurses going, something's going on. The principal's like, I heard about this party, and I know that student was there, and that's why at any point in time, that vet process can be activated because we know something else might be going on.
Okay.
So That's the best we could come up with, was trying to fit those in the numbers. It was a concern that was also brought up, though. So.
Great, thank you. And I'll just point out the Maricopa County Department of Public Health study in the fall with ASU did a seroprevalence study for their own concerns, that the underreporting of data in that publication. One of the key findings was that a minimum, and this was in the context of a very different kind of community spread than we are in now, but the minimum is that 3 times the cases are existing in the community compared to what is being reported. And again, that's 3 months ago, so that's old data now, but nonetheless relevant. One more question from me for now. Your vet, the vet team, redundant, T squared, how does that team change if it is an athletic team? We're not talking, I mean, the additional team member, presumably the athletic director would be involved, the coach.
Yeah, it would likely be the athletic director, the coaches, the
Head trainer.
athletic trainers, you know, depending upon the severity of it. Possibly Nathan Slater here from the district. It's just whoever needs to be there is there.
And that is how it's working now
Yeah.
with the current
Yeah.
situation? 'Cause
Yes.
They've got the most experience at this point. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all of your work, all of you, and all the extra time you have put in to putting your thoughts here on behalf of all of us in the community and the schools. Thank you.
Are there any further board member questions or comments? Board Member Sinowski.
Thank you. I do have a comment. I do want to let you know how much I appreciate that you have included in your statistics both students and staff counts. I think that's very important. It's tough to separate within a school environment one from the other. So thank you.
Board Member Beckman.
Just a quick statement. I need to state that I really would have liked to seen some parents on the committee. We have some educated and informed parents. Some of them are in the medical profession, and some of them working directly with COVID metrics for some of our universities. 24 hours to hear from our parents, to me, was just not enough. At this point, too, because it is relevant with regard to developing this and when and if it stays relevant, I'm formally requesting a meeting February 23rd or at the latest, to have a discussion at our regular meeting on March 2nd to address where we are in the community with regard to the metrics and our Plan A, returning to school in full time, and the community's expectations.
Are there any further board member questions or comments? Well, thank you again. I believe that all of my questions were asked and answered by other board members in your committee. And I think it is worth noting, without surprise, that the work you have done was approved and given a green light by the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. I think that speaks to how hard you all worked on this, how thorough it was, and I greatly appreciate it. With that said, the chair moves to approve the building level COVID metrics to establish parameters regarding a return to distance learning for specific campuses, classrooms, and/or programs. Is there a second? Vice President Sinowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the building level COVID metrics to establish parameters regarding a return to distance learning for specific campuses, classrooms, and/or programs. Is there any further debate? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 5B, approval of school calendars. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. I'd like to ask Cheryl Redner and Dr. Fountain to come forward. As you know, at our last meeting, we had a conversation about the calendar. A number of concerns were expressed by governing board members. We took an opportunity to put the calendar out to the larger community to solicit additional feedback and questions. And some of the changes have been proposed as a result of the conversation at the governing board table, as well as feedback from the community. I'd like to ask Cheryl if she would walk us through those changes.
Of course. Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sinowski, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and Mrs. Wagner. It's good to see all of you again and to provide the feedback regarding the recommendations for the 2022 through 2025 calendars. As we discussed last week, and Dr. Menzel just said, we shared several alternative thoughts through Thought Exchange and asked for feedback from our stakeholder groups. Dr. Fountain and I are going to discuss the findings and the logistics. I don't know if I'm doing this or someone behind the curtain is. Okay. Through Thought Exchange, you can see the number of participants and the number of thoughts that came through. Over 300 participants, over 323 thoughts, and then those ratings are based on the weight of the stars that are given. So you can see the number of participants who participated in our survey, in our feedback survey, and it was an open-ended question to provide any input that they may have. You can see the demographics of the folks who participated. So 63% of those folks were parents, 27% were teachers, 5% were classified, 4% were administrative, and then 1% fell into the other category. And you can also see which grade levels they may work with or they have students attending in our district. Again, 42% in elementary, 37% in secondary, 17% may have them in both, and 4% neither. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the general themes that came forward. The biggest hit, if you will, was the general feeling of the start date being early. And so again, just to recap, and Dr. Fountain's going to go through those calendars, this means that we would start the first week in August, and then that last week of July will be designated for teachers for staff preparation days. I need to give them those calendars. So the concerns for starting in early August were related to the heat, which that's what we get in Arizona, in Phoenix, usually, not recently, but usually. And then planned family activities, so traveling or camps or something. And then alignment with start time, beginning of the year outside of Arizona. So those of us who are transplants from other parts of the country know that we start the beginning in August. Certainly in other places start a little bit later. And then there was conversation around what that consistency looks like with our breaks, fall and spring breaks. And looking at that, we looked at other districts' calendars. We aligned to some of them aren't aligned to each other, so we did our best to bring that together. And that's where that information came. The last biggest thought theme was about what happens that first week in January. And Dr. Fountain's going to talk through that as he goes through each of the calendars. And I'm going to make sure you have a copy of that calendar in front of you.
All right, perfect. We'll give Cheryl just a minute to make sure you have the most recent, fresh copy. For those in the audience, there are copies as you came in, and if you're joining us virtually, they're online under the agenda notes from tonight. You can pull up and follow along at home as well. So as we discussed at last week's meeting, it really is a simple mathematical problem. It's 180 days, and where do we put them? The feedback from the board was to take another look at those 3 days, that partial week leading up to the winter holiday, and move those 3 days to honor a more traditional full 2-week format. So to accomplish that, we moved those days to the second semester. So you're going to see a little bit of a shift here in our semester days. As is always the case, anytime you make one move, there are some consequences that come with that. So initially, if you shift those 3 days, and you look at the end of the second semester, it would potentially have made that a 2-day week at the very end, which is a little bit complicated. We have some concerns about students not showing up. It also means that high school final exams would have had to be Friday, Monday, Tuesday. Fortunately, there's a fix for that that actually complements in the 22-23 calendar, so we made it match in 21-22, and that is the observation of New Year's Day. So New Year's Day is typically observed in most elements as a federal holiday. You're going to see on the 22-23 version, that falls on Monday, January 2nd as observation. So our recommendation on the 21-22 calendar is to do the same thing, even though it's really not a federal holiday on January 3rd. It helps to balance that out. So that's that Monday right after the winter break. It pushes that end of the year to give us a nice 3-day week at the end of the year, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's our typical format for semester exams, and it makes those two calendars equal and even. So you can see here we maintained that Wednesday start, August 4th. We did not want to push that any earlier. Maintained fall break, October 11th to the 15th, and then shifted that beginning of the winter recess to Monday, December 20th, going through and including Monday, January 3rd. That's our recommendation no change to spring break, and it's a one-day change from last week's proposal on the end of the year. It just shifts that by one day. But you can see, still keeps the quarters pretty equal and gives us 86 and 94 days for the 2 semesters as opposed to our original proposal of 89 and 91. So very, very close. On the 22-23 version of the calendar, you can see, again, maintaining that midweek start. I'm trying not to go any earlier than we need to, leaving fall break where it is. Again, if you look at the winter break, you'll see that Monday, January 2nd, was potentially the return date. We were recommending that we observe that as a holiday, as a federal holiday, to honor our families who might have that day off. And then again, that pushes that into the year nicely to do those 3 days of the semester exams. Left spring break alone, end of the year, Wednesday, March 24th. Positive side note, if you look at both of those, that I think our staff will appreciate. There's that teacher preparation day that happens at the end. So that would fall on Thursday, which is typically our date for graduation. We would have Friday, everybody done, and that leads into that nice holiday weekend. So I think folks will like and appreciate being able to start any of those holiday plans. And again, 22-23 looks similar, 86 and 94 days for the 2 semesters. I'll just quickly flip through so we don't ignore them, but the 23-24 maintained the proposal from last week, no changes there, as well as the 24-25, no recommended changes there. So on that note, we'll open it up for questions, and obviously the recommendation that we approve these calendars so that we can move them forward. Thank you. Are there any board member questions or comments? Board member Beckman?
So you explained to me, when we talked about that winter holiday and the return in January, I appreciate that it got changed the first 2 years. Why did we keep it the same? The last two, the 23-24, looks like the kids don't get out of school until actually the 23rd in December, and they return that second week again, the 8th of January. And then for the next year, 24-25, we have them out a little bit earlier, the 21st. This might be different than the one I just had. Returning, what day, the 6th again? Okay, so that's a little better, but the 23-24 is kind of similar to my concern before, and so I just wanted you to walk me through why we would have done it acknowledged it and done it for the first 2 years.
Sure.
But not this third year. That's a lot for kids and parents, again, restating what I said previously, to get out literally the Friday before Christmas and the holidays, and then come back that second week of January when most people go back to work.
Sure,
that first
and
week.
I can absolutely walk you through that. So there's a couple of things. One, this is similar to what we were looking at in this 21-22 school year, and we could have recommended a similar proposal, which was the partial week. We got the feedback that was not the desirable option. The alternative to that would be to be out, that would be the 18th, which 17, 16, 15, I think makes it the 15th. So we would be out on Friday the 15th, which means we would return to school on the 1st. We would be back on the 1st. So it's one of those years where Christmas, the Christmas holiday falls on that Monday. It's just tricky because one way or the other, we're either coming up close to that for the recess, or we're back on the 1st. We wouldn't want to be back on the 1st because that would be an observed holiday in and of itself. So looking at, and one of our considerations was looking at historical calendars. This actually happened to us in the 2017-18 year, I believe, and we followed exactly the same calendar. We went up to the 22nd. That was the last day of school, releasing and coming back at approximately the same time frame.
Okay. I'll let other board members ask any other questions.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? Vice President Sinowski?
Yes, I do have a comment. Thank you for making those changes and for offering our community and staff input on these calendars. I do like what I'm seeing, and funny to see the input of it's too hot. When I moved here from Minnesota, I thought the same thing because we always started school after Labor Day. So this is different for people that move in here. It's going to be hot in September too, and October. So we just do this. So it's something that is kind of what we do here in this state. I do want to clarify these teacher preparation days as important days to allow teachers, just so the community understands this, because they might look and go, why do they need so many days? I think there's obviously a time when all staff members need to get together and there's common information that needs to be shared amongst them all. But this is really important time for teachers to start addressing the needs of their incoming students and to welcome them properly. Setting up their classrooms, setting up their electronic grade books, communications, teaming time with other colleagues. This is really important time. We have had times where our school year has ended the day that students left. They had an early dismissal, and then teachers were done at the end of that day. So these days of providing this extra preparation time as part of the paid contract, I think is really important to honor and recognize as important, not just to teachers, but also to the students. So teachers are prepared to receive them. Let's see here. I also always believe that the more eyes we can have on a product, the better the product is. So again, I appreciate the opportunity for us to plan and receive that input. I did have a similar concern with Board Member Beckman on the 2023 calendar, ending the school semester on 12/22. You know, we've also had years where we have continued our first semester after the holiday break, and that was a mess. So I would never advise that. I don't think we ever have to be set on starting at the beginning of the week and ending at the end of a week. I think our community can adapt, given the enough advance notice, including our finals schedules, to do a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday finals schedule, because it's, you know I hear people saying they really want to have their kids have time to prep for their exams, but this is a summative evaluation. So there's a whole semester of learning that then is evaluated through these final exams. It's not just a shot of learning. So just to make sure that, like what I'm saying may be helpful for community members to understand the placement of those 3 days is not as important as continual best teaching practices that our teachers put in place on a regular basis, reviewing everything that they teach in their classroom. That's it. Thank you.
Board Member Beckman?
You just jogged my memory on something. There was a concern last time with PSAT. Did that change where it was like fall break, there was an issue? Can you
Right,
speak
so
to
that's for next school year's calendar, because that's as far as we have PSAT dates for. They don't give them to us that far in advance. So basically, PSAT releases 3 dates. There's a main testing date, a Saturday testing date, and an alternate testing date. We historically in Scottsdale have used the alternate testing date. So the scheduled testing date is October 13th. That would fall over our scheduled fall break. The Saturday then is the 16th, also over our fall break. But the alternate testing date, the one that we typically have used as a district, is the 27th. It's 2 weeks later. So checking with the assessment department, that's the standard one we've used anyway. So
Okay.
in the end, it was less of a concern.
Okay, so thank you. I wanted to address that because that was asked a lot. And then also, thank you for circling back and making these changes with community input. I really appreciate it. One thing that might be interesting for the community to know, when I was an elementary school parent, I was hot on the bandwagon with why do we start in August as well. I couldn't figure it out. Why do we run our air conditioning like this? It's horrible. You have to walk your kids in. It was a nightmare. And then when I finally talked to someone and realized they said the entire state would have to change at the same time because our athletic programs would have to line up. And then it made sense. I thought, well, I can kind of see that. Then, your games, your practices, all of that would have to line up. So then I understood. So again, thank you. I appreciate you addressing this. This is much better.
Are there any further comments or questions? As I noted to Dr. Menzel, in 2019, I had asked that we consider making our general election days a professional development day in order to promote civic engagement in our district. Unfortunately, the committee that existed then no longer exists, and so we had a new committee, and that was not a factor that took place in the development of these calendars. Arizona also has a very strong history of voting by mail. It's a very secure way of voting in our state. But we did note, and I did recently bring it up, that there might be reasons to move that back to a professional development day, depending on certain changes at the legislature. So it's something just to keep on our radar. It is very common in other states that the general election days be a professional development day, in part because a lot of those public schools actually host voting, which would be also an awesome opportunity for our own district, for our students and our staff to witness. Again, it's always really good for our schools to be engaged with our community and help provide all sorts of different services to them. So I just wanted to note that as something to potentially keep on our radar. Are there any further questions or comments at this time? The chair moves to approve the school calendars as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and seconded that we approve the school calendars as presented. Is there any further debate? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0.
Gerald, did
Chair-
you get nervous?
What's that?
I thought you were nervous for a second.
Me?
The chair moves to adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Number 48 Governing Board at 6 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell's seconds. It is moved and seconded that we adjourn this special meeting of the Governing Board. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The meeting is adjourned at 6 p.m.